Oh no, say it ain't so, Tanjiro. Last we left off with the Demon Slayer story, things were just downright tragic. Not only did we have the confirmed deaths of 3 Hashira, but we also had the deaths of Tanjiro and Muzan. However, starting off this preceding chapter titled The King of Demons, we have the life reflection of our late final villain, Muzan. And as if the giant baby form wasn't enough, we also get to see Muzan as a literal human fetus, as he reflected on how he'd always been mere inches away from the shadow of death's grasp. That apparently, his heart had stopped on more than one occasion when he remained dormant within his mother's womb. In fact, he was actually dubbed to be stillborn as he lacked a pulse and remained without breath for a very long time. But terrifyingly enough, when it came time to cremate his remains, his will to live remained, and he struggled and moved as he let out his very first cries. Now, maybe it wasn't to this almost supernatural extent, but the once harrowing health of Muzan very much reminds me of Lower Moon 5, Rui's story as a frail and sickly human boy, and so I wonder if maybe Muzan pitied or saw a bit of his former self when he decided to convert him. But anyways, he continued on saying that whatever he immensely desired would eventually come to fruition one way or another, by virtue of nothing more than his own merit and activism. However, even he recognized that despite his overwhelming capabilities, that which he could do by his lonesome had its limitations, which I then equate to his reasoning behind assembling a powerful collective of demons in the form of the upper and lower moons. Surely he'd inject his blood into others with the intent of one eventually conquering the sun, but in that particular case, he prioritized power above all else. Now, Muzan would actually concede to the earlier statements of the late master of the Demon Slayers, that all that lives must die, that there is a certain inevitability to the occupation of flesh. However, in witnessing the efforts of the Demon Slayers firsthand, he'd also come to the realization that only feelings remain undying. It's to the point where he admits to failing to recollect even a single human being that he had killed, which, mind you, number in at least the thousands, and that's only if we consider his direct involvement. Flesh dies, and that's the end of that. However, the feeling that resides within the flesh may be passed on and never collapse. Muzan could not outlive an ideal. This was the true power of the Demon Slayers, and in recognizing the fact that his immortality paled in comparison, he trembled as tears filled his eyes. Muzan was on the verge of death to the sun, but in mimicry of the Demon Slayers who had thwarted him, recognized his feelings to also be undying. And so, seeing as how Tanjiro has been pulled into himself, Muzan decided to impart everything onto him. Tanjiro really did die, but because some of his cells remained alive, it wasn't too late for Muzan to proceed. He decided to give Tanjiro everything, every ounce of his power, because Muzan believes Tanjiro will conquer the sun and become the strongest demon of all, the king. Being the older brother of Nezuko, the demon who first conquered the sun, and a swordsman capable of possessing the same sun-breathing style as the mighty Yorichi, being able to overcome the sun is pretty much a given at that point. Muzan entrusted everything to Tanjiro for the sake of fulfilling his dream, and then he died. Now, in the present, things really kick off. The body of Tanjiro remained fixed in place as many cried around him, but in a single instant, the formation over his eye would retract as peering eyes similar to that of Muzan would open up. The new king had arisen, and in only a moment later, his once severed arm would be replaced and outstretched, and he'd make a swipe for the neck of one of the cleanup members. Tomioka, with what remaining strength he had, leapt to the person's aid. The others, still in shock and disbelief, remained still. They called to Tanjiro, But when they saw that blood-craving face of his, could only ask, why? Tanjiro would quickly make a swipe for another, but before he could rip their head off of their shoulders, he'd be stopped by the burn of the sun. Everyone was still in shock and unmoving. Tomioka, being the only sensible one left around, yelled with all the wind remaining in his lungs for the aid of anyone still able to fight. His voice would be heard over a distance and be met with confusion, as for them, the fight was over, Muzan was dead. I mean, even the current leader of the Demon Slayers hit the snooze button real quick. But Tomioka would continue, expressing that Tanjiro had become a demon and that their best course of action was to expose him to the sun, that they needed to kill him before he kills anyone. Which, beyond the basic flat-out reasoning of not wanting anyone to die, Tomioka said this as to preserve Tanjiro's humanity and purity, similar to that of Nezuko. But now feeling the burn of the sun, Tanjiro would break the earth beneath him in his dash for the shade of the train car. But before he could make it there, Tomioka would intercept him. Tomioka wanting nothing more than for Tanjiro to die as a human. But as he did this, Tanjiro's burning would cease. And just like that, as if he'd placed a crown on his head and seated himself on the throne, the King of Demons' rule would be consecrated by his conquering of the sun. And as this happened, he'd swipe at the face of Gyu and actually draw blood, and was quick to go for another before being stopped by none other than our boy Inosuke. And mind you, Inosuke is fighting with broken swords here, not to mention all the broken bones I'm sure he also has. Now, the blood loss is obviously getting to Tomioka, as Inosuke tries to remind Tanjiro that Tomioka is their friend. But Tanjiro is a demon, and a feral one at that. And Zenitsu cannot believe it. With all that went down against Muzan, there is really no one to stop him. And so Zenitsu began to cry and asked, what about Nezuko? But Tanjiro obviously isn't hearing this. He wants some boar meat and is just going buck wild for it. Now, during this exchange, Inosuke flashed back to a meal he had shared with his two greatest pals. That they're all comrades, brothers in fact, making it so that if one of them were to stray from the path, they'd all share the responsibility of stopping him. Regardless of the pain associated, they had to walk the right path. Inosuke remembered this and was fully intent on ending Tanjiro. But as he tried to convince himself of that, he thought to the once bright smile of Tanjiro offering him some food. And with that, he swung his blade towards Tanjiro's neck and hesitated. He couldn't do it. He couldn't take his friend's head off. The tears overwhelmed and streamed from his boar mask as the demonic hand of Tanjiro crept close. And Inosuke said to himself once again that he can't do it. And the chapter ends. Wow. This chapter was raw as hell. I said what I said about Muzan before, and I still feel underwhelmed by that guy. But man, here we go. The new King of Demons is here, and it is hype. Now, to be real with you, my only real fear here, or concern I suppose, is that Nezuko is just gonna talk no jutsu the boy, and he'll be all good. But you know what? There really isn't anyone else here to fight this man, so I guess it's kind of a necessity. Legit, only 2 Hashira are left, and one of them is down for the count, while the other is on the verge of collapse on account of blood loss. I mean, I'm sure the one-armed retiree Tengen is somewhere out there, but he's not stopping Tanjiro, that's for damn sure. Demon King Tanjiro just goes too damn hard. I mean, would you look at how the Demon Slayer mark has spread over his face? It is insane. Our boy is out here with some face tats at this point. And honestly, if they want to continue the series, they seriously could do that. And depending on their execution, I for one wouldn't exactly complain. I know they spoke about ending the series this year, but with how successful the anime ended up being, I wouldn't be surprised if an extension check just slid their way. But hey, I'm all for it. Now, seeing everyone's reaction to this is just utterly heartbreaking, but hopefully you are breaking the comment section with all your thoughts on this chapter, because it was just that damn crazy. Now, I'm expecting this to, at the very least, last for 3 chapters or so. So if you don't want to miss out on all our detailed coverage of it all, be sure to subscribe, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best Demon Slayer content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I am Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching, and have an awesome day. I love you.